Roger Cornell, The Banking Conspiracy, Sherlock Holmes and His American Adventures. Episode 4, based on the characters by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. A Go audio production. Ha ha, Jeremy! You're supposed to catch the ball, not bother other people with it. Ha ha ha! A leather ball flew straight towards Sherlock Holmes. He was sitting on a park bench on one of the broad avenues in the middle of New York's Central Park. It was a beautiful summer morning. Children were playing in the park, frolicking at the water features, or letting themselves be chauffeured across the park in amusing goat carts, if they could afford the fare of 20 pence. Those lads who unwittingly drew Holmes into their game could not afford such luxuries. They were clearly the children of poor immigrants from Wales or Ireland, whose fathers or mothers had scrimped and saved for years back home, often going without food to afford the passage tickets for the arduous journey from the old continent, hoping to build their own new life here in the New World. Some of the boys did not even have shoes on their feet, let alone football boots. The leather ball flew straight towards Holmes's bench and touched the ground just before it, bounced up again, but Holmes's left sole was already there. He lifted his foot without putting down his New York Times and skillfully stopped the ball. He let his foot rest on the highest point of the ball as if nothing had happened. Wow, Jeremy, did you see that? That's how you need to handle the ball. Blimey, ha ha ha! Jeremy's mates called out from the other end of the broad avenue. Jeremy was at least a head shorter than the rest of his team, had ginger hair and a face covered in freckles. His large blue eyes grinned mischievously from his face as he cautiously approached Holmes, who had now lifted his newspaper whilst keeping his left foot firmly on the leather ball. "Come on, Jeremy, go for it. You're 2-0 down. What are you waiting for?" shouted the tallest of the lads from across the street. Jeremy stood roughly 5 feet in front of Holmes's bench, wearing sandals that were too small for him, with the straps torn across the instep on both sides. "Which team is playing against which here, then, Jeremy?" Holmes tried to remain as matter-of-fact as possible, keeping his enormous morning edition in front of his face, and had to smile, even before Jeremy could say anything in astonishment. We're from Britain, sir. I've already noticed that, my friend." Holmes took the newspaper halfway from his face and raised his left eyebrow. "Otherwise, you would probably have played something other than football. Am I right?" "Yes, sir." Jeremy was already flushed, and now his ears turned red as well as he noticed from Holmes's accent that he came from his parents' homeland. "So, Jeremy, who should I place my bet on?" Jeremy grinned even wider. We're playing Crystal Palace against Nottingham Forest, sir." "Well, well, the hard-working North versus the arrogant South," Holmes grinned back. "Yes, sir. My parents are from near Nottingham." "Well, splendid, Jeremy. Give those Londoners what for. I hope not to lose any money on you lot. You can wait a bit further back for the ball." Jeremy looked bewildered at the ball under Holmes's left foot and took a few steps backwards to position himself. "Watch out, goalkeeper!" Holmes positioned his left instep under the ball and lifted it from his seat all the way to the other end of the avenue from where it had flown. Jeremy stumbled backwards, straining his gaze on the ball as it looked like it would sail over him. 2 more steps backwards, and he could just barely grasp it with all his might and outstretched arms. Without looking behind him, he had failed to notice a small goat-drawn cart and fell backwards into it, nearly tipping it over. The goats bleated loudly and pointed their horns at Jeremy. "Can't you watch where you're going, you clumsy oaf? Such an impudent brat!" The carter, who was leading the goats by hand, looked furious. "Ha ha, Jeremy! Almost let in another goal there!" "Ha ha!" His teammates joked from the playing field. "Thank you, sir. Have a lovely day, sir." Jeremy held the ball proudly against his chest and couldn't help but laugh. Holmes raised his index finger to the brim of his hat and casually saluted back. "Such insolence! They ought to close the park to these ruffians." The carter was still beside himself. Now, my good man." Holmes removed his pipe from his mouth and looked conciliatorily at the carter. "No harm done, and your passengers would likely find it more pleasant if you were to display a somewhat better mood, my good sir." In the small carriage sat two girls of roughly Jeremy's age, wearing pretty floral summer dresses, sun hats, and little parasols, turning to look at Jeremy and his companions. As they did so, they both leaned to one side of the cart until it threatened once again to tip sideways. The goats bleated loudly once more. "It is not permitted to lean out of the carriage whilst in motion. Kindly remain seated," barked the carter at the grinning girls, who instantly lost their cheerful mood. Their parents had paid for a grand tour, but now they would much rather play football with the English lads. The carter, unfortunately, could not hide the fact that on such a brilliant early summer's day as this, he did not have the best of moods to offer. Holmes lit his pipe, rolled his eyes at the girls, and lifted his newspaper back up. They grinned back at Holmes delightedly, covered their mouths with their hands, and repositioned themselves properly in their little carriage. Holmes let his gaze drift over the current headlines. He still had much to do. At the newsagents, he visited every morning. He had stocked up on the Times, the New York Post, and the Independent, two of which still lay folded beside him on the park bench. Commissioner Mulroney berates jurors. New York police accuse firefighters. Factory owners Harris and Blank charged with manslaughter, and so on and so forth. Somewhat satisfied, Holmes's eyes wandered over all these headlines that he, Watson, and Lieutenant Taggart, head of the New York Police Department's Internal Affairs Division, had produced in recent weeks. Evidently, it had paid off to confront the resistance of the New York City Police, even though it had nearly proved fatal for him and Watson. He could not yet glean from the newspapers the extent of fire damage at the Waldorf Hotel, which had been set during his stay in his suite. How fortunate that he and Watson had now taken quarters in an apartment complex belonging to Hampton Bank, unknown to the public. Suddenly, a short marginal note on page 2 of the Independent caught his attention. "Trail of helpful master detective from London has gone cold in New York." Well, well, Holmes thought to himself. Is this the beginning of a relaxing holiday? Our good Watson will be delighted about that. Holmes chuckled to himself and leafed through the broadsheet newspapers. As he lit his pipe and searched for matches in his right jacket pocket, someone tapped him on the left shoulder from behind. Holmes spun around and took his pipe from his mouth. "Yays! How may I—" "Oh, Jeremy, our wonderful goalkeeper from Nottingham. Am I right? Everything all right, young friend? I'll admit straight away, I haven't got your ball this time." Holmes smiled slightly and left his pipe unlit. "No, sir. Of course not, sir. I'm supposed to deliver this message to you." Oh, I see. And are you quite certain, Jeremy, that this is meant for me?" "Yes, sir. The man back there in the 2-horse carriage gave me $25 for it." Jeremy turned around, but all that could be seen was the back of a carriage with a glossy black hood and gilded window frame, trotting away calmly. Holmes didn't fancy making the effort to stand up and run after it at that particular moment. Instead, Jeremy held out a small, light blue envelope with a lined interior. On the front was written, "For Sherlock Holmes," in black ink in cursive handwriting. Holmes turned the envelope over to the back and could make out a hardened red seal, though he did not recognise its inscription. "Well then, many thanks, Jeremy. If you ever need another player, you know where to find me." Jeremy had to smile. "Yes, sir, thank you, sir." Holmes reached into the coin pocket of his waistcoat and slipped him a 10-pence piece. "Oh, thank you very much, sir. That wasn't necessary, sir. I had already been paid for the task." Holmes smiled at Jeremy's conscientious reply, but remained firm. "You're essentially right, Jeremy. Perhaps the message you're delivering to me is even deadly." Holmes made a waving motion with the index fingers of his left and right hand. "And it would probably be a grave mistake to reward the messenger as well." Holmes paused and observed as the boy suddenly turned pale and startled. "But we have long since left behind these bad habits of antiquity. Do not worry." Holmes smiled broadly and removed his pipe from the corner of his mouth. "And therefore, I hope that with your earnings today, you will find suitable summer refreshments for yourself and your comrades?" Jeremy looked relieved. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Of course, sir. Yes, that's what we shall do." "Jeremy, where are you? Your goal is empty again. You lot will end up proper losers today. Come on, get over here, quick sharp," called his friends from behind him, and Jeremy was back in the game on the other side of the avenue. Meanwhile, Holmes put his pipe back in his mouth and tried to open the envelope with the index finger of his right hand. The seal broke, and he removed a card from the envelope, which was addressed to Holmes with the following lines. "Dear Mr. Holmes, I regret that I could not come to you as discussed. Please visit me from 11:30 at Hampton Bank in the basement. Yours faithfully, B. Hampton." Holmes raised his eyebrow and reached into his waistcoat pocket with his left hand to retrieve his watch chain. His watch indicated it was just before 11 o'clock. He still had some time, as Hampton Bank was only a few minutes' walk from his park bench, and he rather fancied enjoying a few more headlines about his mysterious disappearance in New York. "Well, I think we should set up the X-ray machine on the ground floor. It's quite heavy. We need at least 3 people just to move it." Mary Jane de Winter was full of enthusiasm to get her newly acquired equipment up and running for the hospital. "There's something to your argument, Mary Jane. However, all the waiting rooms and reception areas are on the ground floor, and many patients must first stay down here. It could easily lead to longer waiting times quite quickly." "Well, yes. If one wants to get better, one simply has to accept a bit of waiting time, doesn't one?" "Of course, that's true. However, nobody wants to wait to be relieved of their pain because the doctor in charge is trying to take an X-ray of a coachman's fractured lower leg," Watson replied. You're right, John. We had quite a few of those last year. Oh dear, by the looks of it, I think we'll need more staff as well, which won't be easy." Mary Jane suddenly found herself confronted with entirely different challenges. "We had this problem several months ago. All hospitals, both old and newly built ones, are desperately searching for good doctors and cannot find any. Among the newly immigrated people, there are certainly enough doctors, but most who want to work as doctors either don't speak our language or speak it too poorly to treat our patients, let alone perform surgery." Mary Jane looked genuinely concerned at John. Watson raised his eyebrows and thought aloud. "Well, it worked with Leif, didn't it?" "No, Leif had already been in New York before he came to us. But you're right, he told me that when he first arrived here at Ellis Island, he couldn't speak a word of English. I think you will surely find the right staff soon, my dearest. However, it likely won't happen overnight. You'll need to have a bit more patience." Mary Jane was pleased by the fact that Watson wanted to calm her, and she felt that he would probably be right. Until now, all major decisions had worked out according to her wishes. "Yes, John, thank you. I think you're right. I'm truly very glad that you're by my side. I would say, let's try to find a good spot for the X-ray machine on the first floor. What shall we do with the sterilization unit?" "Well, I think it's best kept near the operating rooms, where the surgical instruments should be prepared for the next operation. What do you think?" "Fabulous. Of course. Oh, we're truly fortunate to have someone like you by our side, John." Mary Jane smiled at him and was visibly relieved. "I'm very pleased about that, Mary Jane. However, I do hope that we never again have to experience the circumstances under which I last operated." Watson briefly thought about his recent war experiences. "Well, thank goodness those times are gone forever, and I never want to experience that period again when I didn't know how I would pay the next electricity bill." She looked at him somewhat exhausted, but nevertheless relieved. "I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for that, John. I just realise I am rather deeply in your debt." Watson smiled and replied somewhat frivolously, You think I should finally take advantage of this situation? I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. Lady de Winter was rather unsettled for a moment. Watson tried to remain matter-of-fact. Strictly speaking, we should actually thank good old Sherlock. He deserves the credit and any potential benefit from it. You are right, my dearest. I actually owe him a great deal of gratitude. She smiled mischievously and raised her left eyebrow. If he hadn't persuaded Becky Goldman and Emily Sachs to arrange those 2 charity evenings, we probably would never have managed to raise enough money to afford all these purchases here. Indeed, you speak the truth. Have we actually thought about dedicating the foundation plaques in the foyer downstairs to both of them? Mary Jane remained relaxed. And for heaven's sake, how grateful I am that we can pay our electricity and hot water bills, and even our staff's wages and cleaning supplies for an entire year in advance. You are right. It is a very pleasant circumstance. Above all, one must not forget that due to the improvements you have been able to implement since those days, numerous burn patients have already been able to return home. Oh, what a fool I was to let Joseph string me along like that. The mere thought of it makes me angry all over again. Mary Jane had to glance briefly out of the window and furrowed her brow. Don't be too hard on yourself, my dear. One cannot always predict what a person has up their sleeve. That would mean we'd need to be able to look inside their head. That would probably be a matter for Dr. Freud. Watson shrugged innocently and took hold of her arm. What's worse is that your ex-husband Joseph Ashe apparently knew about his tenant's schemes and did nothing about it. He raised his eyebrows in disappointment and looked trustingly at Mary Jane. Oh my God! When I think about it, I become even more furious. How could he allow such a thing? Just for some rental income. He could have easily had that from other entrepreneurs. But no, he was lured by the insurance premium in case of a fire. That they were all in cahoots. My ex-husband, Blank, Harris, and even the police right up to the police commissioner. The mere thought makes me feel quite ill. Please, John, let's talk about other things. Ah, there you are. Mary Jane, I'm off then. Leif, the medical director, stood in the doorway. All right, Leif, when will you be back? Here? Never again. I'm done. I'm sorry, but I can't do it anymore. Olsen looked very serious through his small brass spectacles. He had removed his doctor's coat and was dressed in a grey suit with a white shirt. But Leif? What? Why? Mary Jane couldn't finish speaking. You're well taken care of anyway. Olsen glared angrily at Watson. But my dear... Nothing of the sort. I'm not your dear. And not yours either. Haven't been for a long time. Farewell! Olsen threw his key onto the table, turned around in the doorframe and hurried out. Mary Jane stood up and tried, But Leif, you can't do this. Watson held her back by the arm. Not now, Mary Jane. It would be the wrong moment. But we don't have any. Nevertheless, not now, trust me. Whom may I announce? Holmes was greeted by a slim young man in a pinstripe suit at the Hampton Bank's information desk. He scrutinised Holmes over the rim of his nickel-framed spectacles, waiting for an answer. Holmes handed him the message he had received earlier from a messenger in Central Park. My name is Holmes, Sherlock Holmes. Suddenly, the gentleman at reception changed his pace. Yes, sir. Of course, sir. If you would be so kind as to wait a moment, I must make a quick telephone call. Gladly, my good man. Patience is my middle name. Holmes smiled at the hurried bustle and took a step to the side. The gentleman at reception picked up a glossy black telephone receiver and asked tersely, Yes? Walton from reception here. Mr. Holmes is here to see Director Hampton. Clear orders seemed to have come from the other end, as Walton only replied, Yes, madam, at once. Yes, in 1 minute, madam. And 1. Mr. Walton picked up a sign on a brass stand, placed it on the counter, and turned to Holmes. If you would kindly follow me, Mr. Holmes, I shall take you to Director Hampton. Most gladly, my good man, I shall follow you conspicuously. The slim gentleman with the nickel-framed spectacles looked at Holmes tensely and blocked off his counter. The sign read, "Counter temporarily unattended." Holmes strode after the reception manager across the sand-coloured marble floor through the bank's cashier hall towards a stairway, which was blocked by an ornately decorated black cast-iron gate. The tips of the gate, the handle, and the coat of arms within the gate were painted in gold. Walton reached for the largest key on his ring, which was secured with a chain, and turned it twice to the right. "This way, please, Mr. Holmes," Walton said to Holmes, removing the key and descending the wide staircase before him. Upon reaching the first basement level, they walked past several doors, all of which were locked. Walton stopped in front of a heavy oak door, Holmes behind him. Walton had no matching key for this door. Instead, he tapped a rhythm on the door with one of the keys from his ring. A small black plaque was mounted on the door, its gold lettering reading, Directors Club. Silently, the door opened from within. A man in his early 40s appeared, wearing a barber's uniform. He was very slim with a high forehead, slicked back jet black hair and a sharp hooked nose, and was chewing gum. "Well then, my good Walton, what can I do for you today?" "Hello, Max. I'm bringing a guest." "Oh, for whom? You know, down here we only have invited guests." "For Director Hampton," Walton replied. "Oh, for the old man? Are you sure? He's currently under Lorenzo's knife." "Yes, Max, I'm sure he knows. Mrs. Rosemount told me that he's waiting." "Oh, the old office dragon? Well, then it must be true, my little friend." Max grinned smugly and examined Holmes with a raised eyebrow. "And you, my friend? You are?" "I think we haven't had the pleasure yet, so friend seems a bit premature, Mr. Max." Holmes smiled casually and looked directly at him. "Holmes is my name, Sherlock Holmes." "So, Sherlock Holmes. And what business do you have with the old man?" "Max, how dare you? That's absolutely none of your business. This gentleman has no time to waste. What are you waiting for?" All right, Walton. No need to spook the horses. Surely one's allowed to ask. We don't get much news from the wide world down here." He looked upward and tapped Holmes's jacket with a thin black comb. "Come with me, my friend. I shall escort you." Holmes raised his eyebrows with interest and followed Max through a corridor, from which broad doors led off to the left and right. Inside the club, the marble floor was dark red, and Holmes read signs such as Massage 1, Aroma, Club Coffee, Turkish Bath, Humidor, and various other rooms where the well-being of senior bank employees and their select clients was attended to in a private atmosphere. At the very end of the corridor was a fully equipped hair salon, brightly lit, with a high ceiling, large mirrors in front of each barber's chair, and between them countless framed photographs of famous personalities and the various directors of the bank. Director Hampton reclined in the last chair on the left side, had a white apron draped around his neck, and was receiving a shave with a straight razor. "Benjamin, your visitor is here," Max addressed Director Hampton and pushed Holmes in his direction. "Go on then, my friend. He doesn't bite." Max raised his eyebrow cheekily and grinned at Holmes. Evidently, Max was the boss here and made sure everyone else, including his guests, knew it. "Mr. Holmes, what a pleasure!" Director Hampton turned his head to the left and back, smearing shaving foam across his face. "Please come closer and take a seat." Holmes approached hesitantly and sat down in the chair next to the director. "Thank you, Lorenzo. Please leave us alone for a moment." The barber who had been attending to Hampton silently put down his straight razor and sat on a narrow bar stool in the far corner. He opened his discarded newspaper and retrieved his cigarette butt from an overflowing ashtray. Holmes took his place in the barber's chair next to the director, raised his feet onto the footrest, leaned on the armrests, and turned to Hampton. "What can I do for you, Director Hampton?" "I'm very pleased you managed to make it. I apologise for the brief ambush in the park. but unfortunately I was detained this morning and couldn't visit you personally." Hampton smiled pleasantly from his semi-reclined position. "How are you and Dr. Watson getting on with our apartment, Mr. Holmes? Is everything to your satisfaction?" Lorenzo briefly glanced up from reading his newspaper in the background, without removing the cigarette stub from his mouth. "Everything is splendid, Mr. Hampton. Thank you very much. Dr. Watson and I are in the best of health, presumably much to the dismay of the police commissioner and the owners of the shirtwaist factory." Holmes tried to make light of the arson attempt on his life at the Waldorf Hotel. Hampton shook with amusement. "The police commissioner, ha ha ha. Yes, one really shouldn't mess with reinforcements from the old world, ha ha. By the way, Mr. Hampton, we saved First National Insurance a considerable sum of money that they didn't have to pay due to the court ruling," Holmes added. "You're right, my good man. Director Ferguson, a dear friend of mine, was extremely grateful for the efforts of the great unknown from England who saved him so much money. I must admit, he has already inquired about you, but naturally I didn't breathe a word about your current whereabouts," Hampton added, putting on an innocent face and placing his right index finger on his soaped lips. "We are greatly indebted to you, Director Hampton. As you know, Dr. Watson and I have nearly experienced firsthand how long the arm of the New York police can be," Holmes affirmed. "Ha ha, you said it, Holmes. Firsthand. Simply setting fire to your own suite. Simply unbelievable when you consider the damage they caused," Hampton continued. Holmes raised an eyebrow and added, "You can believe me, dear director, that we are grateful to have escaped with our lives." Hampton looked at him with wide eyes, somewhat bewildered. "Yes, of course, Holmes. What luck?" After a moment's pause, he added, "Very well, my dear fellow. The reason we asked you here, I don't think we can let you return to our old homeland so quickly, as it appears your next case is already waiting for you." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Well, that is extraordinarily flattering, Director Hampton, but—" I know, my good Holmes. Technically, you are here on holiday and to recover. But firstly, it shall not be to your detriment. And secondly, the matter is of such national significance that we cannot possibly leave the outcome of this case to the New York police, or even the federal police." Hampton seemed quite serious about it, and Holmes could sense that he was apparently also eager to achieve results. Initially, Holmes tried to maintain his distance. "Well, you see, I would need to discuss this beforehand with my partner and assistant, Dr. Watson." Hampton smiled. "From what I understand, he is likely present here in New York more in the role of your personal physician." Holmes's ears reddened slightly, but otherwise he did not show that he was somewhat surprised by Hampton's level of knowledge. He cannot remember having shared such details in Hampton's presence. Perhaps Watson, that old chatterbox? It is true that he fulfills his responsibilities as a doctor 100%, and as a patient, one can consider oneself fortunate to be in his care. Holmes put on a non-committal smile. "With your next case, we cannot even say whether there is still a patient," Hampton abruptly interrupted Sherlock. "An important colleague of mine, who was with us at a meeting just a few days ago, has not returned home from there." Holmes's attention was piqued. "How long ago was that?" he asked with interest. "Approximately 48 hours. On the last morning when we were meant to depart from Jekyll Island, he failed to appear. We waited for quite some time, even sent out search parties for him, but most of us could not wait any longer." "And have you informed the police?" "Of course. They are combing through the area right now, but he couldn't have gone very far in such a short time." "Where exactly is Jekyll Island?" "Approximately 900 miles south of Manhattan in the state of Georgia, near the Florida border. The weather is hot and very humid at this time of year, but he was in excellent health." Hampton appeared very thoughtful. "Lorenzo, can we please continue? I need to keep an eye on the time." The barber in the background rose silently, took one last drag from his cigarette butt, then put the newspaper away. He began adjusting Hampton's hairline with a comb and scissors on the right side, whilst on the other side he faced Holmes. "And how did you travel there?" asked Holmes. "By railway. Although there isn't a completely direct connection yet, both the outward and return journeys were relatively trouble-free. We were all in good spirits, including our missing colleague, and there weren't any hostile remarks, if you understand what I mean." "How many people travelled with you?" Holmes inquired. "There were 7 of us, and each had 1 or 2 personal assistants or secretaries with them, 17 people in total, except for James, who came alone. James Pullman." "I assume that is the gentleman who is still considered missing," Holmes interjected. "You've got it, my dear fellow. That's him." "And what do his wife and family have to say about it?" asked Holmes. "They don't even know yet. They went up to his in-laws at Martha's Vineyard at the weekend and are expected to stay the whole week. We have sent a telegram, but we don't yet know if they've received the message." Hampton shrugged his shoulders unknowingly. "And what, if I may ask, was the purpose of a meeting that could only be held so far from Manhattan? And why?" Holmes appeared interested, but did not want to make any commitment without first consulting Watson. "That, my dear Holmes, I can only tell you after you accept the assignment, as it is a matter of utmost importance, and therefore of the highest level of secrecy." Hampton rolled his eyes and tried to put on an innocent look. "And indeed for the entire American nation." Holmes raised an eyebrow and added, "It rather seems you are trying to flatter me, Director Hampton." "No, my dear Holmes. I know you far too well by now and understand that you are not at all receptive to such superficialities." Hampton raised his left eyebrow craftily and smiled amiably. Holmes paused for a moment. He had evidently misjudged Hampton. "Believe me, my dear fellow, if this matter were not of such eminent importance, we would have already put some agent from the New York police on it." Hampton looked contentedly towards Holmes. "Lorenzo, not too short on the sides, but keep the ears clear." "Of course, Director, as always." Lorenzo made a carefree expression and shrugged his shoulders slightly. "Why is it so important to you, my dear Director Hampton, that someone from outside takes care of this matter? Do you think there aren't enough competent officers at the New York police?" "Quite the contrary, my dear fellow, perhaps even the most competent worldwide. Ahem." He coughed noticeably, "with perhaps a few exceptions." "But," Holmes persisted, "what prevents you from trusting the police?" Hampton became serious. "Confidentiality, my dear Holmes. You must have felt this yourself. If it becomes known that our group was at a secret location for several days to forge certain plans for the future of the American nation, we must instantly bury all activities." Hampton sat up and turned in his chair to face Holmes directly. "And that, my esteemed Sherlock, would come at a great cost to the American nation." He raised his index finger. "Following the stock market crash of 1907, which was only a few years ago, that would be devastating." Holmes looked questioning. "Well, in London we didn't experience it quite as intensely, but the collapse here destroyed countless banks and cost hundreds of thousands of jobs in the American economy." Hampton looked dejected. "The Secretary of the Treasury himself appealed to our conscience to ensure that something like this never happens again." He looked up at Holmes and turned back to the mirror. Lorenzo checked the length of both hairlines and turned Hampton's head with both hands, first to one side, then to the other. "What do you expect from me, Director Hampton?" asked Holmes. "That you take the 7 o'clock train this evening to Georgia. Your expense account has already been filled, with $1,500. Your daily remuneration amounts to $100. Should you require more, I request you send word." Lorenzo fixed his gaze upon Holmes, who looked back and raised his left eyebrow. "You are right, my good Hampton. For someone who places particular value on money or appearances, This offer sounds extraordinarily tempting. However, 7 o'clock in the evening, my dear fellow, from Grand Central Station. Walton will provide you upstairs with the necessary cash, travel documents and tickets, and Schultz, my assistant, will await you at the station in Georgia. But Hampton remained persistent. National implications, Holmes. I implore you. Afterwards, you will be wealthy enough to extend your stay in New York by 2 years. Holmes looked at the floor, realizing there was no way to refuse Hampton's intention. He rose from his barber's chair, approached Hampton and extended his hand. Agreed, Director Hampton. Because it's you. National implications would have concerned me little, as they often conceal sinister motives of one's own governments. Hampton looked somewhat distrustfully and extended his hand from beneath his apron. Have a good journey, Holmes. I thank you. You will hear from me and can be guaranteed that I shall find James Pullman. I'm counting on you, Holmes. 7 o'clock in the evening, Hampton replied, turning back to the mirror and asking, Are we finished then, Lorenzo? Holmes strode hastily out of the salon, where Max, the shop owner, waited for him at the entrance and silently accompanied him to the club's exit. There, he tapped Holmes's jacket shoulder again with his pointed comb. When you make it back, my good man, it will be time to trim your beard. He raised his left eyebrow. Holmes paused for a moment and looked at him questioningly, then hurried up the marble staircase where Walton was already waiting for him with 2 yellow envelopes. To Georgia? What do you want in Georgia? And where is that, anyway? Watson was rather surprised by Holmes's spontaneous travel plans. Here on the East Coast, my friend, though about 900 miles south, Holmes added, whilst lighting his pipe. They sat on a park bench in front of Mary Jane's Hospital, trying to coordinate their plans for the coming days. Well then, it must be rather hot and humid there this time of year. I wouldn't pack the raincoat. Watson smiled awkwardly. Holmes knew that Watson couldn't express his actual concern at the moment, namely that about Holmes's state of health. And who will make sure your old wound doesn't start weeping again? And the muggy climate will certainly get your blood pressure up, believe me. I understand your concern, John, and I appreciate it greatly, but since I'm not travelling to a region with armed conflicts, at least not knowingly, I think I shall manage quite well on my own. Holmes made it clear that he had no problem with looking after himself. However, I would appreciate if you could accompany me for a different reason. Holmes became thoughtful. And that would be, I'm not familiar with the circumstances. I'm dependent on what other complete strangers tell me, and I probably won't be able to conduct undisturbed research on my own. It's quite helpful to work as a pair, to have someone watch your back for important matters. Holmes looked at him questioningly. Watson knew that Holmes had genuine concerns, otherwise he wouldn't bring up this subject. Without these concerns, Holmes would already be sitting on a train heading south. I share your thoughts, Sherlock, but at the moment it looks as though I'm tied down here and cannot easily leave my new work. Watson made quotation marks with both index fingers. He explained to Holmes the situation with Leif Olson, and that Mary Jane would only make do with Watson until she found a suitable replacement for Olson. I wish you the best of luck, my good fellow. At least I see you in your element. Holmes elaborated. What do you mean by that? Watson appeared irritated. Perhaps courting noble ladies of society? Holmes burst out laughing. Ha! You said that, you little rascal. No, of course not, but rather the medical care of your patients. Watson looked relaxed again. But since you mention it, how should one interpret your relationship with Lady de Winter? Holmes remained intrigued. What do you mean by relationship? Watson blinked awkwardly. Well, yes. I think it hasn't escaped your notice that you've been spending every spare moment with her since we arrived here in America. Holmes looked at his personal physician with amusement. Although my impression was already confirmed on the Atlantic, or am I mistaken? Watson did not feel able to provide any further information about it at the moment. "I think this is a matter we'd better discuss after your return from the South," he explained non-committally and somewhat embarrassed. "Of course, my dear fellow, a man's will is his paradise, and the payments from Becky Goldman and Sybil Sachs have arrived?" Holmes tried to remain matter-of-fact. "Indeed, wonderful. Thank you again for your efforts, also from Mary Jane. When you return, we shall arrange a tour of the newly equipped hospital," Watson responded enthusiastically. "This part of our last adventure particularly delights me. You see, even the ugliest catastrophes can have a good outcome," remarked Holmes contentedly. Watson looked at Sherlock earnestly. "Please don't let this adventure end fatefully. Make sure you return safely and in one piece. Can you do that?" Watson showed genuine concern. Holmes nodded calmly and removed the pipe from the corner of his mouth, and Watson continued, "We didn't offer each other the informal you here in America after many decades, only to keep it for just a few weeks. Indeed, my friend, our rebirth at the Waldorf Hotel, where we didn't perish in the fire after all, was truly a ceremonious occasion," Holmes reassured him. "But worry not, my good man. Weeds never die, especially not when they come from London," he said, squeezed Watson's hand, and disappeared around the corner without looking back. "Sir, mister, may I take your suitcase? Brunswick, final stop. All passengers must alight." Holmes had arrived in southern Georgia on the Pan American train. As the carriage doors opened, Holmes was surrounded by many people, most of them dark-skinned, and the train conductor, who helped some passengers disembark and ensured that no one remained in the carriages. No sooner had Holmes stepped onto the platform than a wave of humid heat hit him, which prompted him to remove his jacket, unbutton his shirt, and take off his tie. "Sir, mister, do you need someone to carry your luggage?" A coloured porter repeatedly asked Holmes to let him take his suitcase. "Oh yes, of course, my good man. Many thanks. I require a carriage to continue my journey to Jekyll Island. Would you be so kind as to assist me?" "Yes, sir. Over there is the saloon and the railway hotel where the stagecoaches depart from, and in approximately half an hour, a stagecoach leaves from there to Jekyll Island. The driver is surely still inside, refreshing himself at the bar." The porter smiled at Holmes. "We also have a motor car for hire. It runs on electricity, but Howard the driver has just gone over to Simon's Island to collect Miss Warren for her shopping here in Brunswick. Howard won't be back until noon." The porter removed his cap. "Wonderful," replied Holmes. "I am astonished that you are so well informed about all the various goings-on here, my good man." Holmes raised his eyebrows and winked at the porter. "I'm Albert, sir, mister. Should you ever need any information, you know where to find me. I'm always here for you, sir." "Wonderful, Albert. I shall likely take you up on that shortly. Let us now head over to the saloon." Holmes reached into his waistcoat pocket and handed Albert a $quarter coin. "Oh, thank you, sir, mister. That's very generous of you, though your suitcase is quite light." "Not to worry, Albert. My stay on Jekyll Island likely won't be very long. I'm equipped for just a few days." Holmes retrieved his pipe from his waistcoat pocket. Albert carefully placed Holmes's suitcase, jacket, waistcoat and tie onto his wooden luggage cart, and they both strolled across the wide street to the Norcross Saloon. "In the past few days, several people have arrived who also wanted to go to Jekyll Island, sir. Are you part of that group?" Albert asked Holmes with an innocent undertone. Holmes realised that this was how Albert's information system worked. Sherlock smiled broadly. "You are quite good at deduction, Albert. I think you should keep me company until the stagecoach departs. Come inside. What would you like to drink?" Albert became embarrassed. Holmes opened the swing door whilst Albert remained standing behind him, not crossing the threshold. In the saloon, despite the early morning hour, there was already bustling activity. Workers from the steelworks, civil servants, and many travellers waiting for their onward journey sat at tables, eating and drinking. whilst in the background, an elderly pianist with a white beard and a bowler hat upon his head was seated. "Sorry, sir, but the black fellow must stay outside," called the barkeeper behind the bar to Holmes. "You can take him with you if you insist, but then I can only offer you the table near the lavatories." A few drunkards who had already consumed rather too much at the bar shrieked, "Ha, ha, ha, ha! By the lavatories! Henry, pour us another one. We need to be on our way." Holmes was perplexed. Had he done something wrong? Had he misjudged the tone, made a mistake with the language? "I'm sorry, sir, but those are our rules here." The landlord dried glasses with his apron and pointed with his left hand to a sign above the passageway to the toilets. "No service for Negroes." Holmes raised his eyebrow. "And where is your table by the lavatories?" The landlord draped his tea towel over his shoulder and gestured for Holmes to follow. Around the corner was a tiny table, barely larger than 2 plates. "This is where our lavatory attendant Roberta normally sits. She's also black, but she only comes in the evening because she works at the steelworks during the day. What can I get you?" The landlord fixed Holmes with an indifferent stare whilst chewing on an oversized portion of chewing tobacco. "We'll have 2 cold beers and a portion of tobacco. You do have that, yes?" "Of course, sir. We're a progressive establishment here, though I'll have to put everything in your name, as the black fellow isn't allowed to order anything here, I'm afraid." He shrugged indifferently. "Perfectly clear, Henry. You have your rules." Holmes remained direct and looked at him unflinchingly. Holmes beckoned Albert over, who hurried to him with Holmes's suitcase. The drunkards began to jeer. "Hey, Henry! Are you trying to spoil our beer? What's that Negro doing in the pub? Are all the blacks suddenly allowed in here now?" "Leave it, Ed. It's all right. The gentleman at the back is vouching for him." Henry poured Holmes his 2 beers. The drunkard replied, "Oh, I see. The fine gentleman's a Negro lover, but he won't drink with us." Ed persisted. Albert wiped the sweat from his brow with a white handkerchief. Without Holmes, he would never have entered the saloon. Suddenly, Holmes stood behind the drunkard Ed at the bar. "Henry, how many beers have my 3 friends here already had?" Ed spun around. "How dare you?" "Don't worry, Ed. We'll leave the counting to Henry, our landlord. Nothing can go wrong that way." Holmes gave Ed, the ringleader, a firm pat on the shoulder. "All 3 had 11 beers and 8 brandies, sir," Henry called to Holmes. "Splendid, Henry. Then bring our friends another round, and afterwards bring the bill to me." Holmes raised the index finger of his right hand. "You know where to find me, Henry." Henry's mouth hung half open in astonishment as he spat his oversized mass of brown chewing tobacco into one of the spittoons on the floor. Ed whistled through his teeth. "Well, would you look at that? Let's raise a toast to our Negro friend, eh, lads?" "Indeed, cheers." "Cheers to the stranger." After a brief pause, the remaining guests in the saloon resumed their table conversations, and the piano player adjusted his hat and began playing a cheerful rendition of the Yellow Rose of Texas. Holmes and Albert had taken their seats on the back veranda of the house, on a narrow bench that leaned against the wall. "Now then, Albert, do tell me, whom have you seen coming and going from Jekyll Island these past few days?" "I would like to thank you very much for the cold beer, Sir Mister. Thank you very much, sir. It hasn't happened often that I've drunk in public, or even been invited to do so." "Not at all, Albert. I had completely forgotten that we are in a southern state of the United States, Albert. I do regret that. By the way, my name is not Sir Mister, but Holmes, Sherlock Holmes. I come from England, from London, to be precise." "All right, Mr. Sir. Mr. Holmes." Albert looked embarrassed and smiled at Holmes. "You know, Mr. Holmes, sir, we coloured folk have lived here in America as slaves for the past 300 years, and when the Civil War ended, racial segregation came about. We were no longer treated like animals, but not like human beings either. And in some parts here in Georgia, Many white people will never accept that slavery was abolished more than 40 years ago, Albert recounted glumly. Holmes looked directly into Albert's face, which bore an expression of exhaustion, frustration, and the happiness of the moment to be able to refresh himself here quietly with Holmes over a cold beer. If you keep fighting, you will achieve everything you set out to do, Albert. All coloured people, throughout America, injustice and evil always creep out everywhere, and where one discovers it, one should fight against it with mind and strength, and do so without delay. But I agree with you that a country's laws are not always in one's favour. That requires patience. Unfortunately, that's part of the fight for justice. You have spoken truly, Mr. Holmes, sir. Albert took a sip from his beer mug. I don't know if the gentleman on Jekyll Island about 10 days ago would see it the same way. Ah, yes. Holmes was grateful that Albert reminded him of the reason for his visit here in Georgia. Who can you remember? Which persons do you recall? Or better said, who stood out to you the most? Well, there were several. Stagecoach to Jekyll Island. All aboard. We're departing. The coachman called loudly out the back door, catching sight of Holmes and Albert. All aboard to Jekyll Island. Holmes stood up and said to Albert, Do continue, Albert. Come, would you accompany me to the station? Albert stood up and took Holmes's suitcase. Thank you, Albert, I'll take that. Holmes smiled at him. But sir, Mr. Holmes, you've paid for this? That's quite all right, Albert, please don't worry. I'd be interested to know whom you can remember. Albert walked with Holmes around the outside of the saloon, still holding his beer glass with both hands. About a week ago, sir, there were many distinguished people there. They all had a lot of luggage and were very expensively dressed. There were ladies there too, Albert recalled. Holmes thought that this must have been the first meeting of the Jekyll Island banking group. Albert continued. They were all lodged at Mr. Morgan's hotel. I think they were on holiday together, or something like that. Albert paused briefly. He could not provide Holmes with any more precise details about this event. All aboard, sir. Please, we must depart. People waiting to return from Jekyll Island are waiting. What's the matter with the black fellow? Is he coming? He'll have to sit on the luggage rack at the back. I'm sorry, sir. We're driving for the postal service and have our regulations. The coachman urged the people into the carriage. Holmes listened attentively to Albert and handed his suitcase to the coachman, whilst climbing aboard and leaning out to Albert through the small window. What else did you notice, Albert? There was only one, sir, who came twice in the last few days. Holmes raised his eyebrows. Oh, really? Can you describe him? All 6 passengers of the carriage had now taken their seats, and the ladies were also undoing the top fastenings of their overcoats, as it had become very warm in Brunswick that August morning. He was not very tall, sir, dressed in pinstripes, Albert called up to the carriage window. Yes, Albert, that's right. All the others were dressed like that too. They were bankers after all. But what else? Any peculiarity or any distinguishing feature that you noticed, Albert? The coachman whistled loudly through his teeth. And giddy up! Let's go, my lads! Ferry and Bud, off we go! He cracked his whip over the heads of the 2 front horses, and all 4 began to move. The carriage rolled along the dusty road towards Jekyll Island, and Albert ran a few steps alongside Holmes. Sir, Mr. Holmes, I believe he was German. He was the only German in the whole group, and yesterday he came for the 3rd time. For the 3rd time? But when was he here for the 2nd time? And did you notice anything peculiar about him then? Holmes asked hastily. The 2nd time a few days ago? His shoes, sir. They didn't match his suit. He wore boots like those from the army, or like the ones people wear in mining. Mining? Army? All right, Albert, thank you. I shall make sense of it. Get yourself into the shade. Albert panted, standing still in the dust of the road, still clutching his beer glass. He raised his right hand and thanked Holmes, who stretched his arm out of the window and waved kindly to Albert. Holmes pondered Albert's last words and wondered, who was the only German in the group, and who was from the army, or from the mining industry? After about an hour's journey along the dusty road to Holmes alighted from the carriage. It stopped in front of a hotel called the Jekyll Island Club. No sooner had he set foot on Jekyll Island than Director Benjamin Hampton's personal assistant stood before him. Holmes suddenly remembered Albert's words. "Of course, that's the German." Holmes smiled briefly. Hampton's assistant Schultz extended his right hand towards Holmes, as if trying to keep him at a distance with a barrier, wooden pole. "Good day, Mr. Holmes. Did you have a pleasant journey?" "Good afternoon, Mr. Schultz. I'm delighted to see a familiar face here in the southern United States." He glanced up at Holmes only briefly through his narrow nickel-rimmed spectacles and did not further engage with Holmes's pleasantries. Despite the midday heat, he still wore his pinstripe suit with a high shirt collar and a waistcoat underneath. "It is decidedly warmer here in Georgia than up in New York. For someone like myself, who is accustomed to cool, wet summers in the British Isles, it's quite an adjustment," remarked Holmes. He had removed his jacket and draped it over his left arm. He had unfastened the first 2 buttons of his shirt and was wiping his neck with a handkerchief. "If you would kindly follow me, Mr. Holmes, I should like to briefly show you to your room and familiarise you with the arrangements. In approximately half an hour, we shall meet Lieutenant Saunders from the FBI, who has graciously offered his services, as well as Lieutenant Phillips from the local police force, as this case falls under his jurisdiction. He is still with his officers, who continue to search the area behind the club for any traces of Director Pullman." Holmes observed the purposefulness with which Schultz presented things and the obvious plan with a certain suspicion. Since he assumed Schultz would ignore his answer anyway, he refrained from asking questions and replied briefly, "Wonderful, Mr. Schultz. I shall follow you conspicuously." In the hotel, Schultz led the way, holding Holmes's room key in his hand, and unlocked his first-floor room door. Holmes followed him with quick steps, carrying his suitcase. As he walked, he noticed the numerous pairs of shoes that guests had placed on specially provided mats outside their doorways. "Here you are, Mr. Holmes. Your room key, number 17. I am staying just 2 doors down, in number 19. The entire first and second floors are reserved this week exclusively for police officers working on our case. You can feel quite secure." A hint of a smile played at the corners of Schultz's mouth as he attempted, for the first time in Holmes's presence, to show something resembling human emotion. "I have just noticed from the footwear outside the doors that we are surrounded by either army personnel or a special unit of soldiers. I feel much safer already," Holmes boasted theatrically. Schultz, as usual, did not react at all and continued to inform Holmes. "We shall meet downstairs in the restaurant in approximately half an hour." "I shall be there, Schultz. Thank you very much," he said, and let the door fall shut from the inside. "We have searched everywhere at the back, sir. The men and dogs are tired. We have been at it for 3 days and 2 nights, but could not find anything, not even a trace of a scrap of clothing," said a broad-shouldered man with a sunburnt forehead, sitting at the table in his field uniform, telling the participants that he had already conducted an intensive search with his 40 dogs and 80 men. Holmes glanced at his watch with a raised eyebrow, being the last to arrive at the meeting, which was already in full swing. "I beg your pardon, gentlemen." He looked around the room. "I was informed that this meeting would not begin for another 5 minutes." Schultz, with reddened ears, avoided Holmes's gaze and stared at the floor. He was the only one wearing a pinstripe suit. The other gentleman looked up at Holmes. "Ah, you must be the Englishman. We started 20 minutes ago," said the man in the khaki uniform as he stood up and extended his strong arm towards Holmes. "Benson's the name. Troy Benson. I'm the head of the dog unit here." "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Benson." Holmes extended his hand and gave a slight bow. "I am Holmes, Sherlock Holmes. You deduced correctly, Mr. Benson. I am indeed the Englishman. actually on holiday here, but sometimes things turn out differently than one expects. Isn't that right, Mr. Schultz?" Holmes directed a stern look at Schultz, who stared in another direction through his nickel-rimmed spectacles. "Indeed you say so, Mr. Holmes. The unexpected often occurs. Saunders is my name, Jeff Saunders, from the Federal Police," said a short, wiry man in a grey suit with a broad nose that evidently stemmed from a fistfight long ago, remaining seated as he shook Holmes's hand. "Be our guest, sir. Perhaps you can shed some light on this darkness here?" Saunders added with a smug smile. "That is certainly how you were announced to us. Jeff is quite right about that. Phillips is my name, Lieutenant Bud Phillips from Brunswick Police Department. This case, unfortunately, falls under our jurisdiction. We're grateful for the external support, as we couldn't undertake such an effort for a single missing person on our own." "We simply don't have the resources," said Phillips, who sat at the table in civilian clothes, with his shirt sleeves rolled up and his collar wide open. "Yes, it appears that Director Hampton's group, who were here about a week ago, would like this matter handled with the utmost discretion," said Saunders from the FBI, leaning back expansively in his chair. "Gentlemen, I would like to point out that Director Pullman also had a family who actually have a right to know what happened to him. At this hour, to my knowledge, it is not yet known whether his relatives have been informed about the crime," Holmes remarked as he took the last available seat at the round table. Lieutenant Phillips became alert. "So you apparently know more than we do, Mr. Holmes. Who told you this was a crime?" Phillips from the local police showed concern for the reputation of the Jekyll Island holiday region. "Well, Mr. Phillips, considering everything we have learned about Mr. Pullman, we can rule out suicide. He was evidently an excellent swimmer and in outstanding physical condition, and if someone doesn't leave the premises for an entire week to engage in activities such as hunting, the only remaining possibility is that Mr. Pullman fell victim to a violent crime," Holmes calmly summarized. "As for the nature of the crime and the motive of the perpetrator or perpetrators, that is why we are here, to uncover these facts. Am I right, gentlemen?" A young lady with black pinned-up hair, wearing a white blouse and a tight black apron, approached Holmes and asked politely, "May I bring you something to drink as well, sir?" "Oh, that would be most kind of you. I'll have a glass of raspberry soda. With ice, if you please." "Very well, sir. 1 glass of raspberry soda." She gave a small curtsy, turned on her heel, and hurried towards the kitchen. "Well, sir, at the moment these are nothing more than speculations, wouldn't you say?" Jeff Saunders from the FBI sat up in his chair and raised his left knee against the edge of the table. "Is this really your result after 3 days of combing the grounds with 40 dogs and nearly 100 men, Mr. Saunders? And that's an area no larger than 5 football pitches." Holmes examined him closely. "Ah, sorry, sir. We only have 80 men on the grounds," Troy Benson from the dog unit pointed out. "Of course, Mr. Benson. I apologise. However, that doesn't change the facts. You're expending considerable effort, have had the area cordoned off extensively, and have absolutely nothing to show for it. Not even circumstantial evidence from what I've heard. Am I right, Mr. Phillips?" Holmes surveyed the group with a piercing gaze. He took his pipe from his coat pocket and began searching for his matches. "Here you are, sir." Benson from the dog unit held out a lit match. "Oh, that's very thoughtful of you, Mr. Benson." Holmes raised his eyebrows appreciatively and nodded to him kindly. "Well, Jeff, he's right when he's right," said Bud Phillips from Brunswick Police Department. "He says we have nothing, and that's true. We have precisely nothing. Then we'll just keep searching until we find something." Saunders from the FBI seemed somewhat impatient. "Here is your raspberry soda, sir." The young lady brought Holmes a chilled glass of raspberry soda with a straw, ice and mint. "Thank you very much, my dear. My room number is 17. "Yes, sir, number 17. Thank you very much, sir." "Gentlemen, I understand well that swift results are expected of you all, but just because external pressure is somewhat greater That does not mean such a crime will solve itself. Am I right, Mr. Phillips? Holmes let a few smoke rings rise into the air from his pipe. He took a hearty sip of his raspberry soda, let his gaze sweep around the group, and leaned back. I do not mean to suggest that a search is fundamentally wrong, or that we should abandon the search. Quite the contrary, gentlemen. I merely suggest that we might perhaps alter our search for Mr. Pullman, or the traces of the crime of which he has fallen victim. Consider new things and different thoughts. That all sounds well and good, Holmes, but what do you suggest? What should we do? Wait for better times? We have no choice but to search? Don't you think so? He looked at Holmes reproachfully. Allow me to point out, Mr. Saunders, when I am asked to participate in solving a crime, my first priority is to learn about the surrounding circumstances, the potential motives of possible perpetrators, the private environment, any conflicts, and so forth, and so forth. Only then do I begin searching for clues. However, after such thorough prior consideration, the trail becomes so clear that the search for evidence is usually child's play rather than a large-scale military maneuver, if you understand my meaning. All the men looked at each other in bewilderment and did not utter a word. Suddenly, Schultz raised his voice. If you'll permit me to make an observation, gentlemen, I believe our master detective from London is right. We need results. I shall now retire to work, and should you need anything, please send word so that I may organise things for you in good time. And please bear in mind that we cannot cordon off Jekyll Island for months on end. The public is already taking notice of us. That is something the gentlemen around Director Hampton and Director Morgan wish to avoid at all costs. Good luck! Without waiting for a response, Schultz pushed his chair back from the table, rose and left the group. Well, that's just marvellous, exactly what we needed, grumbled Saunders from the FBI. First, no information whatsoever. We frighten all the horses, and now here we sit. Let's not forget, Jeff, that our departments received substantial donations beforehand, and an annual bonus was promised for all officers on duty here, added Bud Phillips from the local police. Bonus, bonus, bonus. We're police officers, not bankers. These fine gentlemen believe they can simply buy all the world's truths. Saunders appeared frustrated. I think, gentlemen, it is time we put our heads together regarding our future strategy, Holmes added now. For as you can see, neither mutual accusations nor doubling our resources will get us any further in this matter. Money, unfortunately, does not solve criminal cases. When do you propose we meet here again? My dogs and our lads need a break now, Troy Benson interjected. Everyone needs something to eat, fresh water, and must get some shut-eye. Right then, Troy. Bring all the men in and tend to the dogs. Tell them to be ready at sunrise tomorrow morning to continue the search, ordered Bud Phillips from the local police. One more thing, Troy. No whiskey and no women in the rooms until we're finished here. Is that clear? We have an enormous reputation to lose. I hope everyone understands that. Understood, Lieutenant. We'll behave ourselves. I'll go and fetch the men and the dogs. Wonderful, gentlemen. Then I suggest we meet here again tomorrow morning. Shall we say 7:30? Holmes asked the group. 7:30 works. See you tomorrow, sir, replied Saunders from the FBI. Everyone stood up and went their separate ways. Holmes took another puff on his pipe and reviewed what had been said before he heard the first barking of the tired bloodhounds outside. Well, and then my mum said, "Why don't you do something with dogs?" And that's how I ended up with the dog unit. I could have just as easily done this job with the fire brigade or water rescue, although we get called out to help them far too often anyway. But I can tell you one thing, Mr. Holmes. Without dogs, I would never have ended up with the police. Working only with people, that wouldn't have been possible for me. That sounds exactly like the fulfillment of a childhood dream, Mr. Benson. Holmes and Troy Benson from the dog unit sat on the seafront promenade behind the hotel's club grounds, smoking cigarettes and pipes. A gentle breeze blew behind them towards the sea. The sun was just setting, and Holmes tried to get a clearer picture of the circumstances surrounding the search operation for Director Pullman. "You know, Troy, what strikes me as rather peculiar about this case?" "No? What do you mean? Haven't got a clue." "That none of those involved even remotely considers that Director Pullman might have come to harm through outside interference. Everyone assumes that Director Pullman disappeared somewhere of his own accord, but nobody considers that he might have fallen victim to a violent crime. Rather strange, don't you think?" Holmes turned towards Benson. "You're right, Mr. Holmes. It's probably because no one still knows why all these people from New York were here of all places about a week ago, and why they gathered here. To this day, no one knows." Holmes listened intently, as this was exactly what he wanted to learn from Benson, for he was quite certain that he wouldn't have received any answers to this question from Schultz, even though Director Hampton had promised him this. "I find that equally puzzling, Mr. Benson, particularly since all the guests and directors live and work directly in New York." "Exactly. But I can tell you, we all have the strictest orders from above not to divulge any details of our search, and we're operating at the highest level of secrecy. We're not even allowed to talk to our wives about anything suspicious we notice here, or about which persons we're in contact with. We even had to sign documents to that effect." Tell me, Mr. Benson, what scent of Director Pullman did the dogs actually pick up to be able to follow any trace of him? "We have his sun hat, which Miranda, the girl from the service, found on the putting green of the golf course when she wanted to clean the tables on the rear terrace." "Well, well," remarked Holmes sharply, raising his left eyebrow. Benson continued, "But nobody knows how the hat got there. It was actually lying exactly opposite to our official search direction, which surprised us all." Holmes replied patiently, "Well, I suppose it's important to ask who declared that part of the grounds as the official search area." Benson's breath caught briefly as he looked at Holmes in surprise. Holmes raised his eyebrows. "You see, Mr. Benson, as I said this afternoon, when solving any crime, it pays to exercise one's mental faculties before wasting too much physical effort." "I'm beginning to understand why you're such a master detective, Mr. Holmes," said Benson, looking at Holmes in amazement. "But I think I'll hit the hay now, sir. It's been long days and nights until now." Benson stubbed out his cigarette and rose from the bench. "We want to be fresh for work tomorrow morning, don't we?" Holmes replied, "Yes, we do. One more question, Mr. Benson. What's actually going on down there near the beach? There, to the right and left of the club's property." "Back there? Those are building plots. New hotels are being built there. From what I've heard, even some of the bank representatives who were here last week invested rather heavily in these projects." "Ah, interesting," Holmes replied. "And might one have a look around?" "Well, I believe it's currently a restricted area. The construction companies wanted us to stay out of their way so they could continue working undisturbed. And since that was fine with us, our lieutenants had no objections." Holmes looked on with interest. "But nobody's working now, and I certainly wouldn't be getting in anyone's way." "Now? Well, yes, sir. I think why not? You are indeed an important part of the investigation team. But it's getting rather dark. In a few minutes you won't be able to see your hand in front of your face." Holmes pulled out a novel torch from his right coat pocket, switched it on, and shone it directly into Benson's face. "My little companion here lights my way, at least for a certain time." He smiled and directed the beam onto the path in front of their park bench. "Devil's work! What you've got there!" Benson was astonished and laughed loudly. "No wonder you solve your cases in no time with all those gimmicks, sir." "Well, my dear Troy, preparation is half the battle. I wish you a peaceful night, sweet dreams. We'll see each other tomorrow morning." "Miranda, bring me another coffee," said Bud Phillips from Brunswick Police Department, arriving punctually at 7:15 in the breakfast room. Holmes was already at the table and welcomed him. He had finished his ham and eggs with 2 cups of coffee and some orange juice half an hour earlier and was now smoking his pipe. "Would you please bring me another orange juice, Miranda, thank you?" "Certainly, sir. With ice again." "Yes, please. Thank you, Miranda." "Well then, Mr. Holmes, do you have any big plans for today?" Phillips, being one of the first from the remaining search team, was interested in what would happen next. Until today, his team had neither produced results nor found any trace of Director Pullman for far too long. Or even better, perhaps you could inform us about your ideas on how to proceed in the coming days? "Well, Lieutenant Phillips, by all appearances, we won't need any more days. Therefore, a plan for the rest of the week is unnecessary, Lieutenant." Holmes contentedly let a few smoke rings rise from his pipe. "Does that mean you want to leave us again today?" Phillips looked at Holmes questioningly. "No, it means that the case is solved for me." Holmes smiled at him sheepishly. Phillips's breath caught. He choked on his breakfast egg and quickly reached for his glass of orange juice. After a brief coughing fit, he put the glass back down. What do you mean by that, Holmes?" "Good morning, everyone. Well, Bud, are you all right?" Lieutenant Saunders from the FBI took his arranged seat at the table. "Haven't I told you not to reach for a cigarette first thing in the morning? They'll be the death of you, and we'll all be witnesses to it." He patted him on the back with the flat of his hand and laughed loudly. "Morning, Jeff. No, my cigarettes aren't the cause of my coughing fit, but rather Mr. Holmes here." He wanted to continue when Schultz arrived, taking his seat at the table, and, as always, despite the warm morning, keeping his jacket and waistcoat buttoned up. "Good morning, gentlemen. Are there any plans for today?" he asked the group with a certain indifference, the certainty of the unattainable. "I would say we are approaching a possible investigation result, Mr. Schultz." Holmes took the floor. "But that sounded quite different a minute ago, Holmes," Phillips interjected, looking at Holmes in disbelief. "Please be patient, Lieutenant Phillips. Let us wait for our remaining guests." Holmes remained calm. "Guests? What guests? I think we're only missing Troy, who was probably already out with his dogs," remarked Saunders from the FBI. "Ah, speak of the devil!" And there was Troy Benson, the leader of the dog unit, greeting everyone warmly with 2 enormous bloodhounds on 2 long, narrow leads. Both of them immediately came to Holmes and licked his right hand, which he let hang down from the right side of the armchair. "Castor, Pollux, what's this?" Troy Benson from the dog unit pulled on the leads with the strength of both arms. "Leave it, Troy. We're just becoming friends, which is quite convenient." Holmes scratched both dogs vigorously with his right hand, as if he had known them for a long time. Castor and Pollux howled as if they had picked up a scent and lay down beside Holmes on the floor. One had the impression they were waiting for his command. Troy Benson and the others looked at each other in bewilderment. Phillips asked the group, "We are actually all here, gentlemen. Mr. Holmes, would you like to begin?" "I would like to wait for Mr. McCarthy. He will be with us in a few minutes," Holmes reassured everyone. "McCarthy? Who might that be, Holmes? Are we expanding our investigative team?" Lieutenant Saunders from the FBI was particularly curious. "Not quite, Mr. Saunders. Let's say we're getting some practical assistance that we'll need in a few minutes." Holmes looked at everyone present with a friendly expression. "Would any of the gentlemen like more coffee?" Miranda, the service girl, stood at the side of the table with a tray holding a pot of hot coffee. Everyone except Holmes raised their hand and eagerly received a refill. "Let me begin with my observations, gentlemen. It is better if we do not waste any more time. I do not wish to diminish your efforts thus far, but evidently you have conducted your search on the wrong side of the island. By chance, yesterday I was made aware of the construction sites on the beach, which, according to my deductions from the evidence, will today provide us with the solution to our search for Director Pullman." Saunders from the FBI interrupted. But we were expressly forbidden from the beginning to go near the construction sites. Our clients did not want any delays in building their new hotels, so they could quickly welcome new tourists to Jekyll Island. My mission is to find Director Pullman, with or without hotels, gentlemen. Suddenly, Schultz spoke up. That is out of the question, Mr. Holmes. Delays at the construction sites are absolutely forbidden. Director Hampton and Director Morgan are strictly against it. I can assure you that any delay will not last longer than a few hours. And you are certainly right that we do not wish to make life difficult for our clients, Mr. Schultz. But, at present, we are dealing with a missing person for more than 48 hours, who has been untraceable for several days or more than a week, which means we must consider the possibility of a crime. Schultz remained stubborn. That is pure speculation, Mr. Holmes. That may be true, Mr. Schultz, but from this speculation emerged the fact that after the extensive search you orchestrated here, neither the local police nor the federal police have the slightest trace to find the missing person. Am I right, gentlemen? You are right, sir. When a missing person does not reappear after 48 hours, we must take action on our own accord, regardless of whether we have received an assignment or not. Phillips confirmed Holmes's statements and shrugged towards Schultz. Saunders from the FBI added, "And you yourself filed the report about Director Pullman's disappearance with us, if I'm not mistaken." He opened his arms as a gesture of his innocence. "Wonderful, Mr. Saunders. Then we can fully devote ourselves to my findings from last night." Holmes smiled cordially around the room and then at Schultz. "Is this Mr. Holmes's gathering, Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" A wiry, adolescent man stood behind them. He had a sun-tanned face, a broad hat and work gloves, and wore heavy boots. "Yes, good morning, Mr. McCarthy. Allow me to introduce, gentlemen, Mr. Timothy McCarthy, from one of the largest construction companies here. He oversees 3 of the existing construction sites, and he has assured me that we will not hinder him if we complete our investigations in a timely manner. Am I right, Mr. McCarthy?" "It's time. Our steam excavator is just rolling in. You want to go to the second foundation, correct?" "Yes, sir. Would you like another coffee, Mr. McCarthy?" "Thank you, sir. Most kind, sir, but there's no time. My lads have been in the pit since 6 o'clock. We don't want any delays. It's going to be another hot day today." "All clear, Mr. McCarthy?" Holmes nodded to him appreciatively and urged the others. "Gentlemen, would you kindly follow us on a little beach walk? Troy, with your permission, I'll let Castor and Pollux sniff Mr. Pullman's hat." "Go ahead, sir. I'm quite intrigued." Troy Benson rose, loosened the leads, and the 2 bloodhounds began wagging their tails wildly as Holmes held Director Pullman's hat in front of their noses. In an instant, the dogs began pushing towards the door and held their noses to the wind. Troy Benson could barely hold the leads, calling out to the group, "Right then, chaps, I believe they've picked up a scent." Holmes and the others gathered their belongings and hurried after the dogs, who were already dragging their handler along behind them with howls and barks. The remaining dogs of the unit waited outside on the promenade with their handlers for further commands from Troy Benson. He had great difficulty holding Castor and Pollux and called out to them, "Follow me, chaps. They've got a scent. But stay behind. We'll keep to the beach. We don't want to trample everything." Tim McCarthy from the construction company held his hat in his hand and tried to keep up at a running pace. Even Holmes, being a heavy pipe smoker, had no trouble keeping track of Castor and Pollux's trail, watching the events unfold with amusement as suddenly life had come to the entire search party. Only Jeff Saunders from the FBI, who was somewhat portly, struggled greatly to keep pace with the others. In his right hand, he held his hat, and in his left, his cigar stub, and after just a few meters of panting along, he was completely drenched in sweat. After about half a mile, everyone had arrived at a high embankment where all the dog handlers gathered and spread out. Troy was the only one who had run with his 2 dogs about 6 meters below the embankment into a crater that was filled with concrete. It was the foundation for one of the new hotels. Castor and Pollux barked and howled wildly when they reached a corner of the foundation. They began scratching at the hardened concrete with their front paws. Bud Phillips called out to Benson, "Hold them back, Troy. They'll scratch their paws bloody. This stuff is hard as granite." Holmes ran down to Troy and the dogs, whilst everyone else remained above, trying to get a sense of the situation. All the dogs were very loud and excited when Holmes approached Castor and Pollux. Both began to howl and lay down on their bellies beside Holmes. "What good lads you are," said Holmes, extending his hand to them. Benson was once again puzzled by how submissive his dogs were towards Holmes, whilst above, the rest of the pack howled and barked. The search party leaders wiped their brows with their handkerchiefs. The run had tired them, and it had grown quite warm. "Well then, Holmes," called Saunders from the FBI, "stop keeping us in suspense. What's happening here? What have the dogs discovered?" Holmes pulled out a shoe from a bag that he had been carrying throughout the entire run. The black work boot was covered in white cement dust from sole to upper. One could even still see crusts of hardened cement on the heel. "Gentlemen," Holmes began, "it appears our search for Director Pullman has come to an end. Our two faithful helpers here, Castor and Pollux, have found the spot where we shall likely discover nothing more than Director Pullman's corpse, namely, here beneath this concrete foundation. Now you'll wonder, what makes him so certain? Quite simple. Do you see this shoe here?" Holmes held up the shoe by its laces so everyone could see it. "It is the work boot of a man whose right foot matches exactly the spot discovered here by Castor and Pollux. Now you'll ask, how does he know that? It could have been any other work boot from any other worker. But not if the wearer of this boot put such uneven pressure on his right foot that he wore down the heel of the boot significantly on the inside, and wore it down so much that the imprint of this boot matches exactly the tracks of the right shoe here in the concrete foundation." He glanced around the circle to look into the eyes of Saunders, Phillips, and Benson. They held their mouths half open and once again wiped the mist from their necks and foreheads with their handkerchiefs. Holmes placed the shoe into all the tracks in the concrete where the right shoe had left an imprint. "Look here, and here, and here, and here. The alleged perpetrator disposed of Director Pullman's body here when the concrete was not yet hard enough, and Mr. McCarthy was kind enough to provide us with the strength of some of his workers so that we can end this search, which has led you all on a wild goose chase for days. Please remain up here until we have certainty about my theory. Mr. McCarthy, if you would." A murmur went through the crowd as Tim McCarthy summoned 4 men with pickaxes. They went down to the crater and began breaking up the foundation. As they hacked away and slowly uncovered a shirt sleeve, a hand, and then an arm. FBI's Jeff Saunders called down to Sherlock, "Holmes, you still owe us one answer. Whose bloody shoe is it?" Holmes walked up to the people on the embankment and stood in front of Saunders. "Do you see over there, Lieutenant? There goes your answer." Saunders and Phillips spun around and called out in indignation, "That? Just you wait, young man. Come on, release the dogs from their leads. Our murderer is running back there." And whilst Castor, Pollux and the rest of the pack chased after the perpetrator, Holmes could observe on the horizon how Director Hampton's assistant Schultz, for the first time, tore off his jacket, his waistcoat, his tie and his shirt as he fled from the dogs. You were listening to Roger Cornell, The Banking Conspiracy, Sherlock Holmes and His American Adventures, Episode 4, based on the characters by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, a Go Audio production.